Steve Moran here with James Balda for a special edition of Foresight TV. We had a little technical glitch where, for some reason, LinkedIn just wouldn't pick up the broadcast, so we had to restart. But here we are. We are going to be talking about some important issues in the world of advocacy and staffing for senior living with James today. But first, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Well, James, welcome. Let's start by talking about who you are and who Argentum is and what Argentum does.
Sure. So thanks for having me, Steve, and good to see you again. I'm James Balda, President and CEO of Argentum. We're a national trade association representing the senior living industry, independent living, assisted living, memory care, life plan communities. A lot of our focus is on advocating on behalf of the industry at the federal and state level, but also focusing on sort of mission critical issues that impact our providers, really issues around workforce development and quality and operations.
So we are, in some sense, because of the largely because of the pandemic, we're in I start to sort of say bit of a crisis, but I think it may be bigger than a bit of a crisis. And the two sort of critical areas that we want to start with today is government relief for the increased costs related to that, and what you're doing on that, and what the industry can do to help. And you're doing some really cool things in the staffing arena. But let's start with sort of the government relief and talk to us about kind of what the status of that is, what you're hearing from the Hill, and what operators can do to help.
Sure. And you're right. We are in a crisis. I mean, certainly the world has been through the pandemic, but our providers and our communities, I think, have been among those most hard hit by the pandemic. From the earliest days, they were taking measures to protect their residents and keep them safe, closing doors to new residents, acquiring PPE when PPE couldn't be acquired, quite frankly, and finding innovative ways to do that, paying for first testing and ultimately the administration of vaccines in many cases into their communities. But all of this has come at an incredible cost. We estimate that by the end of this year, the industry will have lost about $30 billion related to the cost of the pandemic. Now, that's actual increased expenses, so increased staffing costs, benefits. Oftentimes you saw communities providing transportation or grocery benefits to team members in the midst of the pandemic, so they wouldn't have to go grocery shopping and potentially, acquire COVID-19 that way. And so you've certainly got increased costs, but a lot of it has been the lost revenue as occupancy in our communities has been hit so dramatically. And again, it was because our communities made the right decision early on to protect the residents in their building by reducing move-ins. But that has had an impact. And so we, along with other advocates, have been pushing for support for the industry, financial relief for the industry through the Provider Relief Fund, which is managed by HHS, Health and Human Services. And we were successful early on in making sure our communities qualified for the Provider Relief Fund, but really the support that they have received to date has been woefully inadequate. It really only recognized the costs associated with the first and second quarter of 2020. But we know the way our industry works, the costs and impact for our communities was really in Q3 and Q4 and continues on. It's sort of the long tail of the crisis. And again, it's that occupancy issue where we voluntarily reduced move-ins to keep residents safe. And so we've been working to make sure that additional funds get released through the Provider Relief Fund. There was a bit of a hiccup a few months ago where we actually, the industry had to rally to ultimately save the Provider Relief Fund. There was a point where The remaining funds were actually on the table in infrastructure negotiations. And I couldn't be more proud of our team and the industry and how we all rallied to ultimately save the Provider Relief Fund. But once we were able to do that, we had to quickly move to release the Provider Relief Fund. And fortunately, they heard us, and the administration has announced that there will be a phase 4 of the Provider Relief Fund made available. But now our concern is that there's really only about $13 billion being made available, and it's being made available to virtually every type of healthcare provider you can imagine. So the relief that we're looking for is going to be the same relief that dentists, chiropractors, even social workers to some extent are also going to be applying for. And again, when you think about who we serve and what we've gone through and what our team members have gone through over the last year and a half, 18 months, it's really a travesty that we're not going to get equity out of the Provider Relief Fund. So now we're really focusing on making sure the administration understands that our communities need to be prioritized in this next phase of funding.
So when you look at that $13 billion, what percentage of that do you think is reasonable to come to the senior living industry? I mean, in some sense, you're probably going to say all of it, right? But I suspect that that's probably not a realistic view.
It's not a real, I mean, and we understand that, but quite honestly, when you think about the $30 billion we've lost, that wouldn't even get us halfway there. And you mentioned that we're in a crisis now earlier, and we are. I think this is the tip of the crisis for the country when it comes to long-term care. And we've all been talking about it for years and years, but there is this wave of boomers that are going to need care in some way, shape, or form. And if we don't shore up the long-term care system now, which includes our communities, when you think about seniors that need care, need assistance with activities of daily living, we represent about 25% of those seniors. And so if we don't shore up that element, the private pay element of our long-term care system, our social safety net is going to struggle in the coming years to deal with it. And so while I would certainly respect any decision that we shouldn't receive the full $13 billion, I would argue wholeheartedly that we've earned it and that the industry needs to make that investment now. The other piece is really this reconciliation package that's being negotiated on the Hill, the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure package, as some call it. And I think, originally a part of the intent of that was to make sure that long-term care was included in that and that it recognized sort of this global caregiving economy. But again, our industry has been left out of the committee markups that have been put together. And so we're continuing to advocate with Congress and the Biden administration that this is really a once in a lifetime opportunity for you to set up the long-term care system to be successful for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years when we really need it to be. Because that's really going to be the biggest public policy challenge this country is going to face over the next couple of decades.
So traditionally, the senior living space outside of nursing homes have resisted government funding. I know there's a waiver program where in some states there's some fairly significant funding, but I think there's sort of been this challenge, this concern that if you take government funding, that it then invites regulations. And we see that in general, that's been pretty tough on the nursing home industry. And so is there a shift in thinking that maybe it's time to have more subsidies and ultimately invite more regulation?
No, I don't think there's been a shift. And I would sort of flip that narrative a little bit. I think it's less about taking reimbursement and more about why the private pay model works. And the private pay model works because the consumer makes the decisions. Ultimately, they decide where they live, and if they aren't getting the service that they like in a certain community, then they choose to move out of that community. I can tell you from my own experience in putting my mom in a rehab facility, we really had no choice in terms of what facility she was going to go to. It was what bed was open, and that was what we were stuck with. But in the private pay model, it's a completely different dynamic. I would also say that what we're asking for isn't reimbursement simply financial relief, much like airlines received, much like restaurants received, much like hotels received throughout this crisis. So it's not really about reimbursement. I think it's about shoring up a critical component of the long-term care sector so that the private pay model, which I think is the most successful private pay delivery system in the country, can ultimately continue to grow and meet the need that we're going to need to care for millions of Americans in the future.
Okay, perfect. So, talk to me a little bit about what my audience, were operators, leaders in the senior living field, can do to help make this happen.
Get engaged. I mean, first and foremost, and whether it's with us or another association, I'm a little biased, I'll admit it. I want you to get engaged with us. But connect with your lawmakers, let them know that communities need support, or your clients, if you're an industry partner, your clients, the senior living communities ultimately needs support. And we've got great support from congressional leaders on the Hill. We've just got to make sure the administration knows that senior living needs to be a priority in the Provider Relief Fund and a priority in the upcoming reconciliation package. If people, want to know how to get engaged, they can visit our website, argentum.org, and on that on the homepage, there's a link to Argentum Advocates. It's actually a complimentary membership program where people can engage in all of our public policy efforts. So you can get updates from us, alerts from us, ultimately get links to connect with your elected officials, and support the industry that way. I think that's probably the easiest way for folks to get engaged ultimately.
And so that means emails, phone calls to individual representatives, both on the Senate and the House, and to the White House. It sounds like
we've done it all.
White House being the big bottleneck.
At this point, it is. Again, we've had great support from up on Capitol Hill, and ultimately, it's at the administration's discretion on how to release these funds. And we're not saying others shouldn't release. Other types of providers shouldn't receive some form of relief, but it's completely at this administration's discretion to decide who should get how much. And really, we need to make sure that our communities can keep their doors open. And so we're actually getting ready to launch yet another campaign. We've done Save the PRF. We've done Release the PRF. Now we want equity in the PRF. And so if folks want to go ahead and join now, they'll learn about that campaign in the coming days and ways to get engaged.
So I hate to sort of go into fear-mongering kind of thing, but let's assume for a minute that it doesn't happen, that they just say, forget it, we're not going to take care of it, we're going to send that money in other places, it's more politically expedient. What does that mean for the industry?
Well, it means the industry's going to continue to struggle, right? And it's not just the financial issues. So, for example, in the broader reconciliation package, we're advocating for support to develop a workforce for the senior living industry, and quite frankly, the broader long-term care sector, and even more broadly, the healthcare sector. But without support on the workforce side, we won't be able to care for more residents. And again, we know those residents are coming. It's unavoidable. Demographics are unavoidable, right? But without the ability to develop that workforce, we're going to struggle. And if we struggle, then it's ultimately going to fall to Medicaid to deal with that. And quite frankly, Medicaid is struggling with dealing with that. So it's critical that they make that support available in this next package.
Yeah, and ultimately, Medicaid is significantly more expensive. So that's really, really important. So I want to let's shift to the workforce a little bit. Argentum has sponsored, created an apprentice program, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So we actually were awarded a grant from the Department of Labor to develop a healthcare apprenticeship program that ultimately, what apprenticeships do is career pathing is another word for it, essentially, where you create certain milestones and training opportunities for individuals to advance in a career within a particular sector. And so for us, we created career pathing opportunities so that frontline workers could ultimately move up, become CNAs, and move on to become nurses. And the grant essentially helps us quantify how successful that is. And actually, in our first year, we've had some incredible results. Now, it's relatively small. We've had about 1,700 apprentices go through the program. So when you think about 1 million people working in our industry, it's a small piece of the pie. But what's notable is really the retention. So as you put people through a program, team members through this type of program, and you give them training to be successful, and you reward them for that success with increases in pay and compensation, as well as some ancillary benefits that go along with it, you see a complete change in the retention rate. So right now, we've got about an 85% retention rate for workers that have gone through the apprenticeship program. And we really think that's a model that the industry can emulate. Again, we need to sort of get through this workforce crisis that we're in now, but we all know that it's not going to go away, right? We've been talking about workforce for 20 years, and quite frankly, we're going to be talking about workforce for the next 20 years. But if we can create programs like career pathing and apprenticeships that reward employees, that really deals with the attrition issue, the retention issue in our industry, which will go a long way to helping us build a pipeline of talent.
So so many questions about this. So I'm going to start from an operator perspective. How do they get involved? How many operators are doing this now? How does an operator get involved?
So because it's a grant, right? So we're able to offset some of the training costs that go along with the program. But there are finite dollars. So we've got about 13 employer partners now, and we've got about another 20 employer partners that want to participate. At some point, we run out of dollars to offset training costs, but that doesn't mean employers can't follow the same model. And so that's really where we are now, is trying to onboard more employer partners so that we can share with them the model of how it works, how to implement it. I mean, all of these tools and resources have been put together so they can essentially put it in place within their own communities and ultimately see that success. Unfortunately, though, because the grant is finite, we can't reimburse everybody's training.
Right. So you hand essentially a packaged way of doing an apprentice program. So it's got training modules and some suggestions about how to do. From a participant side, how do people sort of come into the top of the funnel?
In terms of the employers?
In terms of the employers, yeah.
Well, it was first come, first serve, quite honestly, right? So those companies that first came to us when we announced the grant that wanted to participate were able to. And now we're pursuing other funding opportunities to expand the scope of the grant. So right now we've got connections into, I think, about almost 30 states to pursue state funding to offset the existing dollars that we're getting from Department of Labor. We're also taking a look at whether or not it's a 5-year grant. And so we're taking a look at whether or not we can front load some of the grant dollars so we can onboard more employer partners. And then the third option is to ultimately pursue additional grants from the Department of Labor. And again, this goes back to the reconciliation package that's currently being negotiated. If they can build more grant programs like this that the long-term care sector, us, SNFs, others can utilize, then we can continue to sort of expand on this apprenticeship model more broadly.
Okay, and where are the employees? Where are they typically starting from this, and where are they coming from?
So there's a few different tracks, I guess, or career paths that are in the current program. There's caregivers to CNAs to nurses, that healthcare track. There's a leadership track that moves people up into leadership positions within a community. And then there's a healthcare IT track, which is increasingly becoming more important for our sector. And then we're taking a look at whether or not there's additional tracks that we can build out, such as food service is one area that we're taking a look at.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to me that if I were an operator, that being able to say to people who are job hunting, we've got this apprentice program, that if you come in as a caregiver, as a CNA, we've got a program to help you go as far as you want to go, would be a powerful differentiator. Are you seeing that with are the operators who are doing this seeing more success in recruiting and retention?
They are seeing better results on both sides of it. I think the one that is most notable, though, is that retention. And again, we've talked about this within the industry for years. We just continue to replace talent. But if you can keep existing talent, then the need to replace talent becomes much less, right? And the pipeline doesn't need to be as big. And so I think really the critical piece is keeping talent, keeping satisfied, engaged talent that's ultimately going to deliver better care to the resident.
And so do you have any, we didn't talk about this in advance, so you may not have it prepared, but do you have any numbers in terms of the kinds of difference it's making in organizations that are doing this?
No. So part of what we're going to be doing in the second year is actually taking a look at the return on investment of apprenticeship programs. So we now know what the retention rate is. Now we're going to take a look at what does that mean to a company financially in terms of reduced turnover and what ultimately can we save you through higher retention rates. So
okay, cool.
That's a work in progress.
And again, I assume that information that people want to get involved, want to be able to do the apprentice program, apply for it, or do it on their own, available at the Argentum website.
It is. It's called the HAEP program, HAPE program. It's the Healthcare Apprenticeship Expansion Program. So if you go to argentum.org and on the main menu, there'll be the apprenticeship program, HAEP, and you can find more information there.
Cool. So I'm going to actually turn and talk a little bit about the conference. Do you have any reflections, thoughts from the annual conference in Phoenix? I'm going to start by saying for me, it was my first back in person conference in 18 months. And I had the greatest time of all, except that I have to tell you, my stamina for late night parties has dropped a lot, finding myself in bed one night by 9 o'clock and 10 the next. So, but kind of what were sentiments and what are you hearing and just your thoughts and reflections?
Well, my stamina for late night parties, I lost that a long time ago, even pre-pandemic, but I'm sure the pandemic and being at home has taken its toll on people's ability to do that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was great to see everybody. I think the general sense I got from folks was they were just glad to be back together. It was great to see people engaging that hadn't seen each other face to face in a year and a half, more than a year and a half.
Yep.
And so I was thrilled that we were able to do it. We were sort of in the calendar of events of the industry. We were, I think, the first national event to do it. So, that was a little bit nerve-wracking. But we felt it was pretty important for everybody to be able to get back together. COVID's not over. And quite frankly, I don't know when it'll be over. But one of our board members said it best. We've got to learn to live with it, certainly in a way that keeps our team members safe, keeps us all safe, and certainly keeps our residents safe. But business has to go on, and people, I think, were just really excited to get back together.
Yeah, I found it was almost, I know that going into, so first off, I have to say that I guess you have to go in training with me about a little more stamina for the evenings there, James. But anyway, I was like this little kid. I was so exuberant to get back to doing this. And, I don't know whether you know or not, but I keep track of people I talk to. And I think I talked to like 225 people in the 2.5 days there. Lots of them were nothing more than just, hey, and let's catch up later. But it was really terrific. And do you feel like as you talked to, you had a lot of interaction, obviously, with operators there, people feeling optimistic, discouraged, just where's their heart?
Well, so I think everybody's optimistic about the future of the industry. I don't think even in the depths of the pandemic, I don't think that changed, because I think everybody that works in this industry is passionate about what they do and knows that what they do makes a difference. And so I've never, and it's sort of a commentary to the resilience of the industry, I've never felt that people had any despair about what it is we do and where we're going. I do think there's, fatigue from COVID as that has continued, and certainly for the folks in our communities, I know there's fatigue that they're feeling. But that's buoyed by what they do and who they're caring for, and the fact that it does make a difference in people's lives. I will say I sense and I feel it myself, discouraged at the lack of support from policymakers throughout this crisis. We've gotten some, but certainly not what the industry needs, and certainly not what our residents deserve. And so I do feel that, and I think that's a part of why we as an industry and we at Argentum as an organization need to pivot and focus more on public policy and advocacy at the national and state level. Historically, our efforts have been at the state level, but we've got to engage more with policymakers at the national level and be a part of this coming debate around how we're going to provide care for millions of seniors. And we do a great job of it. And we're a case study, I think. And so we've just got to do more and do a better job of educating lawmakers on what it is we do and how to replicate that model going forward.
So as you talk about pivoting, one of the things that you announced is that a shift in, I'm not sure how to describe it, ownership of the conference or management of the conference. And I think it would be worthwhile to maybe just talk for a couple of minutes about that.
Sure. Yeah. And it's not, other organizations that have done this before, other organizations I've been with and other associations. But, we as we were going through the COVID crisis, quickly realized that as an organization, we needed more mind share on public policy, advocacy efforts, but also more mind share on sort of mission critical issues impacting our members in the broader industry, workforce issues, quality and operational issues. And it takes an incredible amount of time and resource and energy to put together a national annual event. And really what we decided to do was to find a best-in-class partner in HMP Global. They're a firm that knows how to put together a world-class event, how to grow a world-class event. And really, we want them to handle the logistics and grow the event. We'll continue to manage the educational programming. That's what we know. That's what our members know. That's what we do best. But they can do all of the logistical components of an event better than we ever would be able to. And so that'll ultimately free us up as an organization to focus more on those issues that matter most to our members, which is public policy, workforce, and quality.
Cool. Yeah, I'm such a big believer, sort of a small entrepreneurial organization. We do a lot of outsourcing. And when I look at the industry, I think there are some great opportunities to outsource. And so I love the fact that you're leading the way in that arena to do that, because frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that to have one big national conference a year, that you've got to have a whole staff to do that. It means that you've got people doing double duty on things, or you've got people who are not working efficiently. And so outsourcing that sounds great. So I'm going to, the last, we've got just a couple of minutes here. I just want you to dream big with me for a minute about what the industry is going to look like in, 3, 5, 10 years. Take your pick, or all three.
I think, we are going to, and I won't put a time frame on this. I think at the end of the day, the legacy of this industry is going to be nobody cares for seniors better than we do. And I go back to the earlier comment about reimbursement. We're reimbursed directly by the resident and their family members, right? They are the customer. They make the decisions. And if we aren't doing a good job, they decide to move somewhere else. And I think that's what puts pressure on quality in terms of improving your quality of care. And I think what we need to do as an organization is make sure that policymakers understand that dynamic and understand the unique opportunity they have to transform the long-term care system. And we talk about this $3.5 trillion reconciliation or human infrastructure package. I think they're thinking about it wrong. I think the biggest crisis that's going to face this country from a domestic perspective is going to be long-term care, how we're going to care for millions of seniors. And I think they should be looking at this package as the Marshall Plan for long-term care. This is an investment that's ultimately going to pay dividends for future generations, because we can build a private pay model that cares for millions of seniors and is ultimately successful. And you can do that by giving people opportunities to save for their long-term care needs, families, unique tax advantage ways to save for their long-term care needs of their loved ones, by housing, middle-income housing tax credits to develop senior living communities for middle-income Americans, although many of our communities already do. But there's a host of opportunities, and of course the workforce component that we talked about that I think can be invested in. But even if we don't get that investment, I still think this industry is going to be a case study, a model for how to care for seniors.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you said in there that just really got my head spinning, that really intrigues me is, what would it look like? What would it do for the industry and for older people if we had some sort of a tax credit for living in senior living communities? I mean, it would save the government money. It would create better lives for older people. It would help the team members have better lives. I mean, what an amazing idea. So,
well, and let the resident make the choice,
right? And the residents get to make the choice.
It's all about choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And absolutely right for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, James, we are out of time. Sorry about the little, I don't know what happened with LinkedIn, to tell you the truth, but we got it done. And I appreciate the time. And I look forward to seeing you I guess the next place I'll see you is in Houston at the NIC conference in a few weeks. So the one more thing I want to say about the conference is the conference had probably two of the best keynote speakers I have ever heard at any conference. They were not big name speakers, but they were powerful leadership speakers. We are going to have both of them on between now and the end of the year as guests on Foresight TV. So you'll want to watch for those. So again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.